You should be ready to roll.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Well, I do want to thank you for letting me come and speak to you. I'm going to stay back here. I'm used to walking around when I present, but knowing that we have people in virtual land as well as here, I want to be respectful of that, so I'm going to have to keep reminding myself, stay here at the podium. But one of the things that I thought about when I was asked by Steve and Dr. Bush about coming here today and speaking in person for a small period of time, most people know me from suicide prevention. I don't know if you saw any of my trainings with K-SPAN during the pandemic. I did several with Dr. Bush and Steve during that time frame. So I may have seen you virtually and not in person. This is actually the first time I've been here in person to one of the meetings. So I appreciate being here today and being asked to present. I'm going to try to keep us somewhat on track, so I may run through this fairly quickly, but it's a very serious topic. It's one that we were just talking about, purple. Well, this is the time of month that we do celebrate, or shall we say remember, those that have had their battle with Alzheimer's. Those that have dealt with the struggle, the battle that goes with that. How many in here has had a loved one that has went through Alzheimer's? Thank you. And I'm sorry for each one of you going through that struggle. As we all know, it is one that I wish we didn't have to see. And that's why it is referred to by many people by the long goodbye. Because you do see your loved one go from the person that you came to know, the person you love dearly, all of a sudden you start seeing some things happen in their life that started to show a decline. And you started becoming more and more less familiar with that person and who that person has become. And so with that being the case, I wanted to share with you my own personal situation and a little bit about Alzheimer's disease specifically. But I want you to know how important it is for you to tell your story. I am someone that working in suicide prevention. I have also been a master trainer with the QPR Institute out of Spokane, Washington. I have done many Gatekeeper trainings on suicide prevention. I trained the counseling staff at Western Kentucky University a couple years ago with Dr. Peggy Crow and Julia Johnson. And so I really enjoyed those 2 days that I was able to do that training with all of their counseling staff. And I've also worked with EKU, and actually this fall in September, I'll be doing a faith-based, a Christian-based QPR Gatekeeper training at EKU for their clergy conference that will be coming up during the National Suicide Prevention Month. So I will be back on track on doing those trainings here throughout the state, but this is the first time I'm speaking on this topic. And I wanted to share with you a little bit about myself and my struggle. So I'm going to show this short video about Alzheimer's and some of the stats. that is probably the one, I'm going to skip through my bio. That is probably the one organization that we're most familiar with when it comes to Alzheimer's is the Alzheimer's Association. During the month of June, they do quite a few different events, walks, to raise money for that awareness. Because when you saw those numbers and we saw the hands that were raised in here, we saw how many people have been affected by Alzheimer's. And unfortunately, we may even have someone in here that's going through those effects. Because when does it start? Well, we're going to look at a few things here and see what Alzheimer's is about. What is Alzheimer's? When we look at Alzheimer's, a lot of times we see Alzheimer's and dementia. How is that different? What is different about the two? Well, what we need to first understand is when it comes to dementia, dementia is your big umbrella. There's several different facets. There's 7 or so facets underneath that umbrella. Different types of dementia. One of the types is Alzheimer's. So it's a specific type of disease that's under that umbrella of dementia. And so when we look at Alzheimer's disease, it is a brain disorder that gets worse over time. Some people will ask, how long will someone live once they're diagnosed with Alzheimer's? A lot of times it's between 3 to 11 years, but some people live as long as 20 plus years with Alzheimer's. And so when we talk about that long goodbye, imagine over 20 years of seeing a decline in your loved one. A lot of times that depends on how old the individual is once they are diagnosed with Alzheimer's, because for some of those individuals, they're already in their 80s and 90 years of age. So you obviously know that their expectancy of life is not going to be 20, 30 plus years, because they are already at a very older age at that point. So we see that there is a deposit of certain proteins that starts affecting your brain. It kind of has a stickiness protein that that actually works against the brain itself and causing it to decline and deteriorate. It is the most common form of dementia. And with that gradual change in your brain itself, we see that there is a gradual decline in memory, thinking, behavior, and social skills. These changes can affect a person's ability to function. The genes you get from your parents play a part at this age, but so do things like diet, exercise, your social life, and other illnesses. And so we have to realize that dementia is not a part of growing older. It's not. About 6.5 million people in the United States age 65 and older live with Alzheimer's disease. Among them, more than 70% are 75 years old and older. Of the about 55 million people worldwide with dementia, 60% to 70% are estimated to have Alzheimer's disease. And so when we look at that, we see that there is the early signs, forgetfulness that is unusual, something that may be, I can't remember, I just said that same conversation that I'm bringing up again just a few moments ago. And one of the things I always remember about my dad, you see on the bio that is on your sheet, I did lose my grandmother and my dad to Alzheimer's and the effects of that. And so I'm going to skip here a little bit. This is my grandmother, Amanda Lou. Amanda Lou, she passed away in 1999. Amanda was someone that we all loved dearly. I never knew my grandfathers. They both passed away before I was born. And so my grandmother on both sides, my mom and dad's side, were very dear and close to me, as many of my first cousins witnessed as we were growing up, and were very close as first cousins. But when we look at my grandmother, she was the matriarch of the family. She was that capstone, if you will. And so when we saw how things affected her with her Alzheimer's diagnosis back in the mid to later 90s, she forgot everybody's name. My dad was the last person she remembered, and he wasn't the one that took care of her. And everybody that took care of her, which included brothers and sisters, said, how does she remember you when she can't even remember us and we're there all the time? There was a lot of uncertainty on why she was going through that process. Eventually, she forgot everyone. She reverted back to days of her marriage. As I said, I didn't know my grandfathers. So I was born in 65. So since then, I didn't know who my grandfather was, who she was married to, but she would always refer to him. Well, it's about time for my husband to get home. It's about time for Isaac to come home, and he's been at work all day. I'm sure he's going to be pretty tired and hungry. And there was even times she reverted back to being a child. And if you had a baby doll around her, you had to be careful because she got very possessive. And she would say, that's mine, that's mine. And so there was that anger that went along with her symptoms that she dealt with Alzheimer's. And so that was something that, or some of the things that stood out about my grandmother over those years of her going through Alzheimer's disease. This is my dad. Dad and mom were married, just had celebrated their 74th year of marriage. And October the 1st of 2022, after several years of struggling, seeing a decline in his health, he succumbed to Alzheimer's. And the one thing with my dad, he was 93 years old when he passed away. He lived a long life that we knew well before the symptoms of Alzheimer's. Some of the things that really stood out with Dad and his Alzheimer's was he forgot the extended family. He forgot my cousins. He forgot who he was kin to on down the line. But he never forgot us as his children and his wife. He always, when I called, I'd always listen. I wouldn't say who I was because I knew Dad when he answered. Even in his later stages of Alzheimer's, he would speak a lot of times, very short periods of conversation. So I knew the phone was quickly going to Mom. So when I didn't say who I was, I wanted to see who he told Mom was on the phone. And I always listened to see if he got my name correct, and he did. And so the thing that with my dad, however, is I saw a decline in his health. As his brain deteriorated in certain areas that affected his short-term memory, eventually it started affecting his heart and other functions in his body. That is what ended his life, was that his body was just given way. From the age as well as the progression of Alzheimer's, he didn't want to eat, and he repeated himself quite often. And my mom always reminded him, Bill, his name was William Alvin, but everybody called him Bill. Now, Bill, you just said that a few minutes ago. And we would have to remind Mom, Dad doesn't understand that he just said that. Dad is in a different place where he didn't remember that. This is my dad as he had been battling Alzheimer's for several years, playing his banjo. And I remember this day very well. And the reason I remember it very well is Dad he loved his music. He loved to sing. And the one thing that as he was playing his banjo, he said, I just don't understand this. I can tell you word for word of something that happened years ago, as if it just happened. But I can't even remember what I had for breakfast this morning. And I know it really was hard for him to understand that. And I said, Dad, it's because of the part of the brain that it does affect. It affects your short-term memory. A few interesting facts. As I said, Dad never forgot Mom or us as children, but Grandma, just a few days before she passed away, she sat in the kitchen singing hymns word for word just a few days before she died. And everybody just sat there in amazement saying, how did she know the words to all these songs? But she didn't even know the names of the people that loved her. There was a white dove that sat on the telephone wire. This white dove, no one saw it before, but about 3 days before my grandma passed away, that dove looked in that window of that living room where my grandma stayed. The last couple of years of her life, she pretty much slept in that living room, was in her rocking chair when she got out of the bed, and that dove stayed on that telephone wire for about 3 days. When my grandmother passed away, that dove flew away, and no one saw it after that time. Was it a sign? Was it a coincidence? It is a sign that many of us look for to say, I know my grandma is going to be okay. She doesn't have to suffer any longer. But I thought that was something that was so interesting about her, the end of her life. But for us as loved ones, we have ongoing fears because grandma had it, dad had it. I now have a sister, an older sister that's in her early 70s that they are starting to say, I believe she's got it. And she's probably more advanced than you all realize. And so we wonder, there was 11 kids, 10 of us are still alive. How many of us will also get that? One day, the doctor may say, you're dying, but you're dying from a long death called Alzheimer's. So looking at that, we are always wondering, when will we start having those effects? When will it start affecting us? How late in life will it be before I start seeing the symptoms in my life if I do get Alzheimer's myself? If that is something that is passed on to me. And then the family and there's also the caregivers during this time. What will they have to relive? The trauma. I have one sister that was very traumatized when she was right there when my dad passed away. She said, Larry, I can't say how hard it was when I looked at Dad and I saw that spark leave his eyes. You saw it just kind of cloud over and you knew he was gone. That sight will always stay with me. What kind of trauma will they have to go through again if one of us is diagnosed with Alzheimer's? So we always have to keep that in the back of our minds and be prepared, because one day it may strike someone else in our family. And so, what is the youngest person to ever have Alzheimer's? 19 years old. In China. This is a recent one. In 2023. And so, this person started having trouble experiencing a condition where their memory was declining by the age of 17, and they had cognitive losses that were worsening over the years. But test after test, the only thing that was conclusive was this person already has a young, early onset of Alzheimer's. So when we look at each person in this room, you're older than 19, I'm older than 19. So we're not clear just because of age. It does have an early onset for some. Most of us do encounter, if we were to ever encounter Alzheimer's disease, it is the 70s, 80s, and 90s that we encounter that. But I wanted to put this slide in here as a reminder, because one of the things when I see Alzheimer's Association set up their table, I ask them, what is the youngest person you've worked with or you've heard about? And it's amazing to see 30s, early 40s is what most of them will say is the earliest. And we hear that quite often. So for the sake of time, I want to kind of keep us on track and everything. But I did want to share with you my personal story. But I wanted to give a shout out to my son. My son is in the PhD program at Ohio State University, and he's in the neuroscience department. He has done research on Parkinson. He's wanting to see what kind of breakthroughs they can do when it comes to Alzheimer's and dementia. He is working with astrocytes, which is brain cells. How to regenerate brain cells. You can't regenerate them. But the University of Kentucky has another crew in their neuroscience department where he graduated with a neuroscience degree in his undergrad. He's now taken all of this experience he's has received, and is really passionate about finding breakthroughs. And now he's just started to find some of those protein connections and how they do impact our brain and its decline. And so I just wanted to give a shout out to my son because of how I've been affected with my many strokes and TIAs, and his own encounter with some brain abnormalities at a young age at Children's Hospital in Cincinnati. They found a couple of abnormalities in his own brain. He said, I want to take this passion, something that's affected me personally, and use it so I know this career is something I will be driven to do. And so I just wanted to give him a shout out, but thank you all so much. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the next person, but I did want to share a little bit about my personal story in our in-between time here.